first books I remember reading when I was 8 years old was Enchanted by Gail, Carson, Levine. I was off track from school for 3 weeks, and since my mom worked, we went to a daycare each morning. It was in our neighborhood, and so we would walk over each morning to her house. I would stick my book in the pocket of my coat and play with my brothers on the way. One morning, I got to my neighbor's house, went to pull my book out of my pocket, and realized that my pocket was empty. The book was gone. I was about halfway done, and now I would never know what happened. The next day, I was morosely walking to daycare again. Not really playing with my brothers this time. Was too sad. When I saw something sticking out of the snow, I reached down for it, and it was my book. It was soggy, the cover was ruined, the pages were puffy once they dried, but they were readable. I salvaged the book. I didn't even care how it looked. I honestly was just so happy that I got to finish the story. And of course, I ended up loving the book. Today I wanted to share my 5 favorite authors with you and just share some of my favorite books from them. The first author I want to talk about is Sanderson. He is one of my favorite authors. He writes mostly fantasy, but some sci-fi. He also writes mostly adult, but he does have a couple middle grade books and a few YA. Because he writes big books, a lot of people are intimidated to start reading his books, but if that is how you are feeling, then I would highly recommend starting with one of his novellas. His novellas are excellent as well. One of my favorite novellas by him is Legion. It is a kind of a detective book about a guy who has, he sees hallucinations, and his hallucinations help him to kind of solve mysteries for people. Another really great one to start with is The Emperor's Soul. It is shorter, but would give you a really good idea of what some of his longer fantasy books are like. If you're not intimidated by his size, then the Mistborn trilogy is a great place to start. A lot of people consider it one of his best books, despite being one of his earliest as well. If you're looking for more of a standalone, then Warbreaker is a great one to start with. It is a little longer, but it wraps up really neatly at the end. If you wanted a middle grade or kind of a more creepy vibe, then The Arithmetist is one of his best books, I think. It is middle grade and has like these chalklings where like you draw chalk creatures and they come to life, and so it does have kind of a creepy vibe. So it's an older middle grade book, but it is super fun and well done. He also has his kind of sillier middle grade series, Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarians, and this is great for a younger audience because they just think it's so funny how silly it is, and it's not bad for an adult audience either. He also has his YA sci-fi series that he is currently working on, which starts with Skyward. A lot of people love Skyward and say that it's one of their favorites. It's not personally my favorite by him, but I know that a lot of people love it and I still really enjoyed it. And of course he has his epic fantasy series. I don't know that I would recommend starting with this one, although it was the first one that I read by Sanderson, and I absolutely loved it and got hooked on his writing because of it. It just has a little bit of a steeper learning curve to get into it, and it will be eventually will be a 10-book series, and they're all about this big, and so it is very much an epic fantasy, kind of think of like Wheel of Time type thing. His website also has a where to start type page if you want to go check that out, and if you enjoy his books, I would definitely sign up for his website. He doesn't over send things to emails, but he does keep you in the loop about what's going on, especially at the end of each year. He tells you what he's planning on working on next, which is always really fun for me. My next favorite author is Shannon Hale, and I have not actually read all of Shannon Hale's books, but the ones that I have read, I have absolutely loved. The place that I would recommend starting is with The Princess Academy. There are 2 more books in the series after this, but if you want just a standalone, it wraps up really nicely and does not require the rest of the series. They're kind of books that take place in the same world, but don't continue on the same story. One of the things I love about Shannon Hale is just how strong her female characters are and how many female friendships that there are throughout, and I always love that about her writing. Her writing style is also just so fun and accessible. My favorite book by her is probably Book of 1,000 Days, and I absolutely love this one. All of her books are really good for older middle grade, YA, or adult. She is more of a children's writer, but I think that they are, because a lot of them have love stories, they do work well for YA and keep an adult's interest. I think her most famous is probably Goose Girl by Shannon Hale, and this is a whole series. It is a fairy tale retelling of a more obscure fairy tale, and this is another one where the book wraps up really nicely with the first one, but then if you want to explore more in the world, then there are more books. She also has some books geared towards younger kids, like she has her Princess in Black series, which is great for, you know, like my 5 and 6-year-old absolutely love the Princess in Black series. She also has some graphic novels that are more about like her, based off of her own childhood with friends, and that one has been absolutely phenomenal as well. Another favorite author that I wanted to share about is Gail Carson Levine. She has written some different fairy tale type books as well as historical fiction. She writes mostly middle grade and YA, so she does gear towards a younger audience. The first book I read by her is probably her most famous, Ella Enchanted, and I absolutely love the book. I don't love the movie as much because I was such a fan of the book and they changed so much of it. I literally grew up just rereading this book over and over again, and I think it's one of my favorite Cinderella retellings. She really recently came out with kind of a prequel to Ella Enchanted called Over Enchanted that takes place in the same world and with some of the same characters, or mentioning some of the characters, and I absolutely loved it as well. And another one that takes place in the same world but doesn't have the same characters is Ferris, and it's actually a Snow White retelling, and I have absolutely loved this one as well. One of her other most popular ones is The Two Princesses of Bamar. I know that some people love this even more than Ella Enchanted. I didn't read this till I was an adult, and I have a lot of nostalgia for Ella Enchanted, and so I can't say that I like it more, but it is a really fun one. And then she also has the Lost Kingdom of Bamar, which is kind of like a prequel to the Two Princesses of Bamar that follow different characters but take place in the same world. They're very fun, very fairy tale-esque. One that is for even younger audiences would be A Tale of Two Castles. And she also has a sequel to this one, and this is like kind of a middle grade mystery fantasy where the main character works with a dragon to solve mysteries. So that's kind of a fun twist, and it's definitely aimed towards younger audiences. She also has a couple historical fiction. She has Dave at Night, and that was one of her first novels. It follows an orphan named Dave who's kind of trying to figure out his place in the world and what he's going to do with his life now that he's an orphan. And actually both of them are based off of her ancestry, and some of her, I know Dave at Night is based off of her grandfather's story, and she did a lot of research, but initially the interest for her book A Ceiling Made of Eggshells, which follows a Jewish girl in maybe like the 14th century, I don't remember exactly when. It's very middle grade, and I loved her voice in the book, and I know that the initial interest in the Jews around that time was because she has ancestors that lived around that time that were Jewish. She does have a contemporary with magical realism book called The Wish, and it wasn't my absolute favorite by her, but I think that if I had been younger when I read it, I would have enjoyed it quite a bit. She also has a couple books on writing, so and they are geared towards younger writers, so if you have a child who is an aspiring author, then those books might be really good for them. The fourth author I wanted to talk about is Gerald Lund, and he is really well known for some of his LDS fiction. I am a member of the Church of Jesus Christ, and so I grew up on some of his books, but he also has quite a few. I know many of you wouldn't be interested in those types of books, but I just wanted to share with you some of the books that he's written that are not geared towards members of my church, because he is a phenomenal writer and his characters are just so real, and he really can suck you into a story. So the first one I wanted to mention is actually a YA dystopian that he's written called The Alliance, and this one, hardly anybody talks about this book, but it is one of the best dystopian books that I've ever read. I absolutely love the themes in it, and just the family focus of it, and the main characters are so strong, and there's a cute little romance in it with a little love triangle that's not overdone, and it's very well paced, and definitely the cover is weird, but the book is so phenomenal. It's actually my husband's favorite book. And it is not LDS at all. It's just a dystopian book with some of the values like being family focused in it, but it's not something that you would need to be LDS to enjoy at all. He's also written the Kingdom and the Crown series, and this is one that just based off of the King James version of the New Testament, and it's a historical fiction set in the time of Christ, and it follows a family that is learning about Christ and lives around that time and sees a lot of the things that are happening. He really does a great job of breaking down kind of the social system and the political what's going on politically and things in a way that is easy to understand and makes it real. And I feel like it has really enhanced my experience in reading the New Testament as well, and just understanding Christ and the time that he lived in. And it is a trilogy, and it always makes me cry, and I love some of the things that he talks about in here, and just the family that we follow I have fallen in love with. And then he's written this Fire and Steel series, which is basically following the events during World War I and leading up to World War II. And one of my favorite things about this series was just the insight that I got into Hitler and how Hitler came to power and things like that, how it might have happened. Again, I really love the family in this. I think that Gerald Lund just writes such beautiful families and family interactions. And the family in this does convert some of them to the LDS Church. And so there is that, but it is not a central part of the plot at all. And some of the members of the family end up not actually converting to the LDS Church. Leverage Point does follow a main character who is LDS, but again, it's not a very prominent part of the novel. The religion isn't. This is like a thriller book, but like really clean. Ethics are a really big theme throughout this book, and some of the ideas explored in it are just really interesting, but it also has quite a bit of action and tension throughout the book, and I thought it was a really well done book. The Guardian is actually a middle grade kind of magical realism book. It's not LDS at all, especially with the magical realism. It follows a girl who gets like kind of a magical pouch that helps her and her family as they are kind of in danger from some people who want to do bad things to their family for their own personal gain. But it has like historical aspects because the pouch came from France, I think during World War II maybe. I don't remember exactly. I do think that is better for older middle grade because it's kind of a thick book. It has a little bit of a slower plot, I would say, but I would definitely say like a 10-year-old would probably enjoy this book. And then the final book that I wanted to talk about is actually one of my least favorite by him, but I just wanted to mention it, and it's The Freedom Factor. And it's kind of like what would our country have been like if the Constitution hadn't been formed? I really like the beginning of the book, but then they kind of go to their alternate reality, and that part is just not quite as interesting to me. But it's not a bad book, and it was interesting, and again, not very LDS centric. He does have his books that are more about LDS history, and of course I really love those. I don't know that they would be as interesting to people who aren't of my faith, and so I didn't really bring those up as much. The final author that I wanted to talk about is actually a fairly new one, and she is an indie author, and that is Sarah Adams. I only own one book by her, The Match, because I keep buying books and then giving them away, but I absolutely love her writing style and her main characters. She started off writing a couple of Regency romances, and those were not actually my absolute favorite, though I did enjoy them. But then she has recently moved to writing adult rom-coms that are clean but steamy romances, and I have absolutely loved every single one of them. Because she's an indie author, she actually publishes fairly regularly, a few books a year, which is really fun because then there's always like a fresh one out that I get to read by her. My favorite by her is probably The Enemy. It is a hate to love romance, but the hate is more of like they have like a competition going on about who can prank each other, and I felt like that was really fun. I love pranks and stuff like that. I thought it also transitioned really well into the love aspect of the book. The main character owns a donut shop, and so that's just really yummy. She also has one called The Temporary Roomie, where the main character is pregnant in the romance, and I thought it was very well done, especially being pregnant myself. A lot of her books, like The Match and The Enemy, they take place in the same world, and so then there's like some mention of previous characters, which is always really fun. She is definitely an author to watch out for, as she is releasing new books all the time. So those are my current 5 favorite authors. A lot of them are authors that I have loved for a very long time. In fact, Sarah Adams is the only new one. And of course I could have mentioned people like C.S. Lewis, but there are too many authors to mention them all, and so I just picked 5 of my favorites to share today. I would love to hear who some of your favorite authors are in the comments below, and what book by them you would recommend starting with. If you like this video, don't forget to hit that thumbs up and subscribe for lots of reading and writing content. If you want to follow my reading journey, I do share a review for every book that I read on Goodreads, and I share my favorite books on Instagram as well as more about my writing journey. I will link both of those in the description box below. And thank you so much for watching my video. I will see you in the next one.